The fight over abortion moves down a new path in Michigan. Should a pregnant teenager need parental consent to terminate a pregnancy? And with a running mate announcement, Robert Kennedy's independent run gets new energy. What does his campaign mean for the 2024 election? Today is Sunday, March 31st, 2024, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. A very happy Easter to you and yours on this Sunday morning. It was quite a week, going back to that still jaw-dropping sight of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsing in Baltimore after being hit by a cargo ship. It was quite a lesson in physics, wasn't it? Like a giant game of Jenga, a sturdy tap on one of the bridge supports brought the massive structure down. Later on this morning, we're going to take a look at what impact that disaster could have on Detroit and its signature industry. But then later in the week, I heard someone describe that wayward ship as a metaphor for this election year. Voters feeling a loss of power as the current carries them toward who knows what. Robert Kennedy Jr. has been one of those rogue waves on the water, and this week with his announcement of a running mate, Nicole Shanahan, the questions grew more intense about the impact he or any other third-party candidate might have. We're going to talk about that this morning, but we're going to start our conversation with the latest battle over abortion in Michigan. Now, yes, the matter may seem settled here, given the vote for reproductive freedom in 2022, but Democrats know the issue is a winner for them. Last week, in fact, a Democrat won a usually Republican legislative seat in Alabama by making abortion and IVF the key issues in that race. But back in Michigan, what about parental consent, which current law demands? Is that a winner for Democrats, or is that finally a place where Republicans can get a foothold on this issue? It's today on Flashpoint. We're going to start out with our roundtable this morning. Very happy to have with me Zoe Clark, political director for Michigan Public Radio. Portia Roberson is the CEO of Focus Hope. Abby Mitch is the executive director of Michigan Rising Action. And Tom Leonard back with us, the former speaker of the Michigan House. Really fascinated by where, Abby, this abortion argument is going now in Michigan. I think Michiganders have made their thoughts on this clear, and yet we keep finding new wrinkles, and now it's over parental consent. Right now, there's a law that teenagers have to have a parent's consent, and a number of folks in Lansing would like to overturn that. Is this a place where conservatives finally can win on an abortion issue, you think?
Oh, I can't think of another situation in which we would have a child have a medical procedure and encourage, as the government, that they keep it a secret. Any ability for a child to keep a medical procedure as a secret is an implicit permission to do so. And not only is that dangerous for their health, but I think it is ill thought out and not in the best interest of the child.
Portia, is this one that bothers you at all? I mean, I've heard a lot of people advocating for overturning this because they point to a lot of special circumstances. But in general,
yeah, I mean,
16 years old, don't you need a parent?
It's tough. And as someone who is very much so about a woman's right to choose and very supportive, you know, it troubles me that there are circumstances where a 15-year-old would want to or need to have an abortion and not have an adult that they could go to and talk to about their desire to terminate a pregnancy for whatever reason. But the reality of it is that we don't live in a society where all young people, young women in particular, or girls, feel comfortable doing that, right? And so the alternative is to, you know, in some respects, maybe do something that's more harmful to them, trying to terminate a pregnancy without parent permission and without knowing how to go to the court for a waiver. Or, you know, we've circumstances where it may be troublesome because a parent, you know, may not support that decision. And so there are stories where, you know, parents have advocated for girls to not have the medicine they need during the procedure because they want their daughters not to have this abortion. So again, as someone who is very much supportive of a woman's right to choose. I think the thing about abortion that's so difficult is there are circumstances where you are conflicted about your feelings personally and then the overall legality and necessity of girls to have this option if they need to terminate.
So many of these stories seem very singular and individual, right? Zoe, what are your thoughts?
And especially when we're talking about 100 cases a year, right? I mean, that's the number that came out from a report this year. The number, 700 or so of under 18 need every year, and then 100 or so actually go in front of a court, basically, to make this determination. So, I mean, to that point, this isn't thousands and thousands, and so these tend to be nuanced cases, is again what this report from the ACLU and Human Rights Watch came out this week. I do think it's clear, even among Democrats in Lansing, there was a reason that parental consent was not put in front of the legislature, because we know where voters tend to be, and that almost for many Democrats seemed to be a step too far. And data that Right to Life of Michigan has put out in polling says, some 70% of Michiganders believe that parents should be involved. So that's why really we haven't seen this come in front of the legislature, because it's a step too far.
It's so interesting, Tom. Right now, you can see how Democrats would want to make everything that they can about abortion. It's proven to be a winning issue for them everywhere. I mentioned off the top of the program, an Alabama legislative seat this past week, reliably Republican went Democrat because that candidate was able to make it about abortion and in particular IVF. What do you think the stomach is in Lansing for changing this?
It's certainly not there. As Zoe said, Democrats, they are in control for the first time. They hold all levers of state government for the first time in 40 years, and they chose not to tackle this. And this is a losing issue politically for them. 67% of voters support keeping this in place. 61% of pro-choice voters, and even 60% of those that voted in favor of Prop 3 believe that parents ought to be notified if their child's going to have an abortion.
Abby, you wanted to add something else there?
I was going to say, I think it's naive. It is 100 cases, but it's naive for us to overlook the influence that laws have over how people think about an issue. All you have to do is look at the ban on smoking in bars, and smoking in public plummets. I mean, when we make laws that make it okay to keep medical procedures a secret from parents, you implicitly tell children and tell families that the state is going to get in between a parent and a child, and that a child should and can keep secrets from their parents, which to me, when we're talking about a medical issue, is a problem, because abortion is not one and done. The complications from abortion are where the lion's share of the medical intervention comes in. And what happens if your teenager begins to have complications for a procedure you know nothing about?
Portia, there's a danger here, right, of Democrats overplaying a hand that they feel like has been a winner.
And I think, as everyone here has said, that's one of the reasons why Democrats have been hesitant to put that before the legislature. And I think it's, abortion is a very personal issue for women and for men, right? And it's not something that I think any of us feel cavalier about. And so I think, we've seen that there has been success around this issue for Democrats, but I don't think that that's what the bulk of Democrats are thinking about, is their political success only. They're thinking about their daughters, their nieces, their granddaughters when they go into the ballot box on this issue. And I think a lot of them are still going to hold back from that, because
all politics is very local, right? What's going
and very
on in your
personal.
Family. Zoe, I'm curious now. Then we've got Donald Trump kind of making the rounds on the idea of a national ban at 15 weeks. Republicans in the Senate not thrilled with that. They want this to remain a state's issue. But Donald Trump says he thinks most people can agree on 15 weeks.
He did, and let's remember too, this is sort of years in the making for the former president, debating in his own mind with his own self, it seems like, where the line in the sand is for him. I also wouldn't be surprised if there's enough pushback that he changes his mind. I mean, that's what we know about the former president. But yes, indeed, as you say, this week he came out and said 15 weeks. This is something, as we saw here in Michigan in 22, that as we're talking about, Democrats are going to continue to. And you put a number on that, you are going to continue to see votes turn out. And again, as you said, we just saw that in Alabama this past week.
Abby, if the vote didn't go the way you would have preferred in Michigan, would you still prefer it be a state's decided state by state, or should this be a national ban?
I think that most people would agree with the Supreme Court's analysis that the Roe needed to be revised and it should have gone to the state.
Most people? Most people supported Roe versus Wade before the Supreme Court decision, at least according to polls.
That is a fair point, but that's not how we decide laws in this country. We decide laws by funding them through the judicial process, and that's not the way our Constitution reads.
Tom, what are your thoughts about making this a national law rather than one that's state by state?
I mean, this is a states' rights issue, and it ought to rest with the states, bottom line. But, you know, when you look at what Donald Trump is doing, it is very difficult to put or to support just this arbitrary number. I mean, Republicans tried to do this in Virginia, and they lost the House and they lost the Senate. So if Donald Trump were smart, I believe he would ask Nikki Haley to be his running mate this fall, because I have never seen a Republican message such a tough issue the way that she did on the campaign trail. It's a tough issue. And listen, Donald Trump wants voters to focus on the border, inflation, the economy. He doesn't want this to be about abortion. If it is, it's a losing issue for him. He wants them to focus on the border. He needs to have a Nikki Haley type on the ballot that can message this
I
issue.
suppose all divides can be bridged, but didn't Nikki Haley burn the curtains on the way out there? I mean, it's kind of hard to see her coming back around.
Listen,
Kicked over the curtains, pulled them down, then lit the match.
I don't know what she would said. I'm talking about the politics, but you look at Nancy Mace in South Carolina. You know, the way that those two have come back together. Again, if he is going to message this issue, he's going to have the right running mate. And I don't think anybody messages better than Nikki Haley did on the campaign trail.
Portia, I'll let you get the last word.
Tom already said if Donald Trump were smart, so we know that Nikki Haley is not going to be his running mate, because we know smartness is not one of those characteristics you automatically think about when you think about Donald Trump. And I think what he's doing to his party by changing his mind over and over again is reflective of the party letting him once again be their de facto leader.
All right, what if it's not one of those parties? What if it's a third-party candidate? We'll talk about that when we continue on Flashpoint on Local 4 right after this. All right, welcome back, Flashpoint. Let's move our conversation, broaden it out to where we are on the presidential race right now. This past week, Robert F. Kennedy tried to inject a little new energy into his campaign by announcing a running mate. The Flashpoint rule is that running mates never win you an election, but he did get a lot of attention.
They can win you
this.
some money.
They can do tell.
Yes. So Nicole Shanahan, who is a multi-millionaire, was really the reason that RFK was basically able to do that big Super Bowl ad that, harkened back to the Kennedy name, that really got a lot of his family members not so happy.
Not so happy.
But really, I mean, it seems that he has found someone who is going to bankroll this campaign. And if he is going to actually make it into all 50 states' ballots, you're going to have money, because you've got to create infrastructure to be able to do that.
The polls, though, show us that, well, of course, we also are still wondering what's going to happen with no labels. But the polls show us a fairly robust, for a third-party candidacy, fairly robust right now for Kennedy, enough to wreck the show for maybe one Joe Biden.
Yeah, I think, it's problematic for Joe Biden. We'd like Robert F. Kennedy to go away and rethink his running for president. There's also some articles that talk about it being a little problematic for Trump as well. So that's not usually what happens when there's a third-party candidate. I guess my feeling about these third-party candidates and their efforts to get on the ballot at the last minute is, how about starting this on January 20th, 2025, when Joe Biden has been reelected? If you really want to establish a third party in this country, you wait until election year, or maybe, 18 months out, to start talking about, I'm going to run a third-party candidate. This is the problem No Labels is having at this point. They can't find anybody who wants to do it. Everybody they thought was going to want to do it is like, yeah, I'll pass. And then you've got Robert F. Kennedy, and I don't think really at this point, even if he gets on the ballot, I don't think he's going to have, even with that money, I don't think he's going to have the excitement that is going to be enough to take down Donald Trump, which is ultimately, if he's not trying to just take down Donald Trump, we've got a problem.
Every time, Abby, that we get to an election where people are voting rather against somebody rather than for someone, everybody says the same thing. This is the year, finally, for a third-party candidate. It never seems to go anywhere. It only affects other races. But in this one, Biden, this could be a profound impact.
I mean, in this case, I think Shanahan has already told us what the impact is. I mean, she told ABC News just a day or two ago that the reason she supports RFK and was on his short list is because she's mad about the DNC and the direction of the Joe Biden White House. I mean, if that isn't crystal clear indication that Joe Biden is in a lot of trouble with his party and his base, if the waffling back and forth on Israel didn't already tell you that, this certainly.
If there is, though, as Portia said, there are a few people wondering the impact on Donald Trump voters. This anti-vax stance that both of these two have now would seem to appeal more to perhaps some who might be inclined to support Donald Trump. Am I right?
I would say that probably the same subset of voters you're seeing flirt with warm feelings about RFK are unlikely to let those warm and fuzzies de-stick them from their Trump vote. I think, agitation and anger is a more powerful motivator than warms and fuzzies. So this is definitely a bigger problem for Joe Biden.
Listen, the Trump base is what it is. There is no anti-vaccine Republican that's not going to show up and vote for Donald Trump. I mean, ultimately, this is about getting RFK on the ballot, as Zoe said, with the money. And if he's on the ballot, even if he gets 5 or 6%, right now polling shows it's about a 2-to-1. He's taking, for every one vote he's getting from Trump, he's taking 2 from Joe Biden. If Michigan is a 10, 15, 20,000 vote race, that benefits Donald Trump at this stage in the game.
Sure.
And the Biden campaign is taking it seriously. I mean, that's what we should. Just this week, Liz Smith.
So what position is he going to flip-flop this week? Because that's sort of the hallmark of his presidency right now.
Liz Smith, who is a political operative that worked for Pete Buttigieg, had a great book out, has been hired basically to sort of run these anti-third-party campaigns. And I think that will be RFK Jr. That's going to be Jill Stein. That's going to be Cornel West. I think it's a little early to tell. I think what happens, especially with the name ideas we're talking about, I think if you took away the last name Kennedy, I just don't think you would see polling as high as just someone with these stances. I think what you have to watch is he going to...
As you mentioned, the Kennedy family would really like to have that name.
Look at the photo that came out when there was the St. Patrick's Day brunch at the White House. I mean, every single Kennedy, there were 1,000 of them, and Biden standing behind. I mean, that was a show of force on purpose, putting that out on social media, saying this is what we want to use this name for.
And you're going to absolutely see much, much more of that, where the Kennedy family, those who disagree with Robert Kennedy, come out strongly for Joe Biden, campaign for Joe Biden. They're going to try and make that difference that, look, our brother, our son, our grandson is not he is not representative of what our father was all about. He is not the Robert Kennedy of yesteryear. So, I mean, I think that they're going to utilize the relationship they have with the Kennedy family and the strong support they have from the Kennedy family to make sure that people understand that these are two different Robert Kennedys.
And that's what I'm wondering about is once people actually, if there's more ads, if people start actually looking at the record instead of the name, is it just a little too far off for some voters who might not be happy with Biden, but suddenly don't go, well, this isn't the candidate for me.
They've only got 30 seconds. Oh, go ahead.
I'd say an interesting note. She spent $4 million on the $7 million ad, the Super Bowl ad that we saw for RFK.
So they're clearly not afraid of exposure. I mean, I think that people do see RFK, and that's what they like.
Well, all right, it's going to be fascinating. Again, we'll wait and see what No Labels does. Gang, thanks so much for the conversation. Very happy Easter to all of you. We come back, we'll talk about what happened in Baltimore, the impact on the auto industry in Detroit. This is Flashpoint on Local 4. All right, let's move now back again to that bridge collapse in Baltimore and what impact it might have on the auto industry. I am very happy to have with me Paul Eisenstein, publisher of the Detroit Bureau, joining us today from the New York Auto Show, where no doubt this has been a topic of conversation. Paul, I'm confused. Half of the stories I read say this really should have not much of an impact on Detroit's auto industry. Then the other half describes the Port of Baltimore as the most critical port for the auto business. So what is the story here?
There are critical ports out there like Savannah, Georgia, and of course the Newark and New Jersey, New York area. This one has more automotive stuff going through it when you're talking about fully assembled vehicles and automotive parts, both in and out of the country, than any other port in the U.S. Now, the real questions are, number one, how soon might they be able to clear a path for people, should say ships, to get in and out of Baltimore? If they can get this done quickly, it may not have any impact. The second thing is, if they can't clear it quickly, and we know the feds are doing an exhaustive investigation, which could tie things up, but if they can't clear it out, what do they do instead? You know, this is an economy which is booming, a lot of imports and exports, and there's not as much space as the industry would like to be able to get their ships in and out of other ports.
I said earlier that this has no doubt been a topic of conversation there. I'm correct, right? This is a real, talking point.
It has come up in every conversation that I have had since I'm here. Again, automakers are just waiting to find out exactly what will happen.
Yeah.
They really don't know yet. How bad the entry to the port has been clogged is one of the unknowns.
Yeah.
How fast they can clear all the junk out, and will federal investigators limit some of the work to clear the port because they may want to leave some things in place for part of the investigation.
Yeah, Paul, one of the things that a lot of us learned through the pandemic, though, everybody like you and people who are in the auto industry have known this all along, but the supply chain is this very fragile thing that it just doesn't take much to knock it off of its efficiency marks, right?
It's interesting that this is happening. We just really have seen the end of the semiconductor shortage, which you remember led to massive reductions in automotive production, both here and abroad, for almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And of course, COVID complicated matters. This is just one more example of how fragile it is. And it's complicated by the fact that automakers use what's called just-in-time production. They want stuff at the auto plants just before they're needed on the assembly line. They have basically eliminated inventory, and that means it's all the more fragile.
Yeah. Lastly, Paul, let's moving away from the supply chain issue to the broader industry. The conversations you're hearing there, where's the optimism? How does everybody feel right now about where the industry is coming out of the big UAW strike, moving into now what I guess we'll call our post-pandemic sort of economy? What's the sense of how the industry is doing?
Good, bad, and indifferent. It's, as you said early on, every time you talk to somebody, you get a different answer.
Yeah.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's the same thing when you talk about the health of the industry. We know that sales in the last couple of months have been extraordinarily strong, which is a great sign. And everybody's hoping that it will be maintained. Everybody's worrying about whether or not, after all these years of predicting a recession, well, now that it looks like there isn't going to be one, maybe there will be. There's so many uncertainties right now, but I think the overall mood is upbeat. Everybody knowing, however, that there are a lot of potential headwinds, whether it be a crisis in the Mideast, a bridge down, possible war with China. I mean, there's just a lot of things. So everybody is a little bit on the edge, even when they're upbeat.
And, of course, trying to figure out our way forward in the EV world as well. Paul, it is always good to have you on the program. I really appreciate it. Enjoy New York, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Great to be with you, Devin.
You bet. Paul Eisenstein from the Detroit Bureau. That's going to do it for us this morning. Thanks so much for being here. Meet the Press coming up next, and we'll see you next time right back here for Flashpoint.